Dr. Ben Carson appeared on CNN with Laura Coates. As a reminder, Ben Carson ran for president in 2016 in the Republican Party, then served in the Trump administration as the HUD secretary, and is now endorsing Trump and supporting him. And we saw from him in this interview what we're now seeing from so many MAGA Republicans. It's sort of the uniform stance now, which is that they will not commit to accepting the 2024 election results. Essentially, if Trump loses, okay, they'll say if it's fair, but we know it's only going to be fair in the mind of Trump, and then they'll follow his lead if he wins. And so here, let's talk about that. Super consequential. Less consequential, but funny, is I really do get the heebie-jeebies, for lack of a better term, from Ben Carson throughout this interview, where well, you'll see. But he's just talking very quietly, which I know he's known to do. But given the subject matter, it all comes off very strange, as if he's being forced to say this stuff under duress. Here is Laura Coates and Ben Carson.
You know, several Trump allies on that very point have been asked this very question about the country and saving the democracy, or republic if you can keep it. Some have given a definitive answer, others have not. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to have your say. Will you accept the results of the 2024 election regardless of who wins? Yes or no?
I will accept the results if it's done in a fair and transparent way.
Do you have reason to doubt that it would be done in a fair and transparent way?
Well, let me put it this way. In the 2020 election, there were a lot of irregularities.
Trump's gonna really hurt me if I say that the 2020 election was legitimate, which I know, and you know, and everyone knows. So, I guess fraud happened.
I think everybody on both sides should be aware of that and should be working to try to satisfy that.
Well, the empirical, and frankly, I know that you're somebody who's drawn to that. There is no evidence of widespread voter fraud that would have changed any result in the 2020 election. Does that suggest to you that the elections and our democracy remain intact?
And I just want to quickly pause to ask you to subscribe to this YouTube channel if you want to help us continue to grow by clicking that subscribe button.
The fact that there are so many people who are skeptical should raise questions for us. The fact that a country like France outlawed general mail-in balloting in 1975 because they said there were too many opportunities for mischief that just could not be controlled. You know, these are all things that we should look at. We're smart people. We can put a man on the moon. We can figure out a transparent way that is satisfactory for the entire population, not for just one segment thereof.
Do you think that we shouldn't do mail-in ballots?
Doesn't it give you a little bit the energy of Trump's up holding cards behind the camera going, say this, as he's just reluctantly having to say these ridiculous talking points he knows to be ridiculous?
I think mail-in ballots for people who can't get to the polls are appropriate, but I think having an election season versus an election day is a mistake.
Why is that?
Because there's too many opportunities for mischief.
But that mischief just doesn't seem to materialize. And he referenced, one of the talking points that really irritates me. He referenced that so many people believe that the elections aren't secure, so that's a problem in and of itself. Yes, Ben, sure. Why do you think they believe that? Why do so many millions of Americans believe these ideas? Well, you might say because maybe they're onto something. Except we've seen the belief in our elections plummet, especially among the MAGA population. Not as more evidence has been brought forward or any of these claims, but instead, as Trump has repeated it, these dishonest claims, these lies, over and over and over again. And he was so weak that he couldn't accept that he lost like an adult and like a man, as maybe you'd say, and instead had to create this whole alternate reality for him and his followers to live in, where he won the election even though he didn't. And as those have been pushed, as that has become this weird identifier of MAGA, they sort of coalesce around this identifying with these election lies, we've seen more people within MAGA believe these claims. And now, you're right, a lot of the Republican Party, the voters who comprise the Republican Party, believe our elections are not secure, but that doesn't make the claims any more legitimate. It just means you've been pretty effective at lying to people, and that's very sad. And so, as I phrased it before, you can't convince someone of something, then point to them believing that something as justification for you pushing that something without justification. And that's what we're seeing from so many of these individuals. And then I've said before, it's not inherently wrong to want to make reforms to our election systems. If you did just have a logical argument you want to make as to why we should restrict mail-in voting, I think you'd be wrong on that, but you can make it in good faith. You can't make it in good faith when you make it running parallel to these election lies, right? Making factually inaccurate statements about our elections proves you have no interest in making them more effective or even secure, because you're actually the one deteriorating the foundation of our democratic process, showing very little dedication to a free, fair, secure electoral process. And that's what we're seeing. The people who talk the most about wanting to stop election interference, the election interference that's not happening, are currently being prosecuted for engaging in election interference. And so if you do have just a thought on what we should do with elections that is different than what we do now and changes reforms, that can be brought forward, but it can't if you're one of the people pushing these lies that are opposed to the truth and our democratic process at large. And so to bring that up to make you sound more rational as you're pushing wild conspiracy theories is ridiculous and should be mocked. Then we move from him to another person who appeared on CNN last night, and this is Byron Donalds. So you have Dr. Ben Carson and Byron Donalds both sort of pitching themselves as potential vice presidential running mates for Donald Trump. Now, by the way, before getting into this next clip, let me know in the comments, of the people you've heard us talk about, Kristi Noem, for example, the cricket killer, and Byron Donalds, some people have floated Marjorie Taylor Greene. I don't see that happening. Carrie Lake has been floated. Ben Carson. Who would you least like to see as Trump's vice presidential running mate? Tell me in the comments. And here, Byron Donalds, again, to be accepted within MAGA, you now cannot say that you would accept the legitimacy of the upcoming election.
You're the one changing the subject, but I do want to make one last note because we have to go. But you've been asked this before. I'm going to ask you again, just for the record. If Donald Trump loses the election in 2024, will you accept the results of that election?
My answer has been very clear on this. If the states,
it's a yes or no question.
If the states and localities actually follow rules and procedures, and everybody sees the rules followed, then of course you accept what's done. But what you cannot have
it's a yes or
are
no
judges
question.
and municipalities and districts not following law passed by state legislatures. That has led us to the problems we have in our elections. That's where you have Republicans and Democrats object to elections. And so,
Fair
again,
to say
we just
that
want to have a clear process.
So your answer is conditional based on...
My answer is always conditional because you want to see the processes of the election actually go according to law.
Right. And so I've said before, there's sort of an inherent assumed condition when we say we accept election results. Obviously, if you could actually prove that an election was being stolen and widespread fraud was taking place, of course, then justice should prevail. People should be held accountable, and that situation should be properly addressed legally. But that's not what's happening here. And their caveat is not if it's actually fair. It's if Trump says that it's fair. And we know Trump's only going to say it's fair if Trump wins. And so Trump has effectively been able to create a party that now requires you, if you want to be in the inner circle of that party, to say that elections are only fair if he wins, at least when it comes to his election. And that's not how democracy functions. It's going to fall apart if we continue experiencing this ideology in the current prevalence that it exists. And that's why it's so important that we call it out and push back against it.